afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Kaikala, and I'm the CEO of the Kent Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for coming to our September luncheon. It is now my pleasure to introduce our president, Steve Haft. He is the Senior Vice President of HR for our borough. He served on the Board of Directors for the last 4 years, and he also serves on the Workforce Development Committee and Government Affairs. Please help me welcome our president, Steve Haft.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Bill Ellis, who is the Chief Economic Development Officer with the City of Kent. Bill has currently been in this position for 7 months and previously served as the Economic Development Analyst in both the cities of Kent as well as the City of Eugene down in Oregon. He did a quick stint at the Port of Seattle as their Economic Development Manager before returning to Kent to take the position he holds today. Bill has a Master's of Regional Planning awarded from the Department of City and Regional Planning at Cornell University. He studied economic development, real estate, practices of urban planning, public-private partnerships, and regional science. So please help me in welcoming the City of Kent Chief Economic Development Officer, Bill Ellis.
I'm here to talk a little bit about a project that the city started a few years back. Called the Meet Me on Meeker project. And for those of you who have heard of this before, my apologies. I'm going to go back to the beginning. For those who have heard about it the first time, I'm going to explain a little bit about its origins. So the city passed an economic development plan in 2014, and one of its key strategies was, graphic isn't showing there, but was placemaking. And a lot of communities are really focused in on placemaking as sort of a concept for attracting more businesses, more people into their area. It's more than just the aesthetics. It's about how spaces, public spaces, are interactive with in a way that increases vitality. And what did we mean by that? One of the strategies, or one of the actions in the commercial court, was rebuild our commercial corridors with a high quality of design. So that took some interpretation. Meeker Street, we observed a few years ago with the discussion of the Part 3 development, with this 10 acres here, the 7 acres that the city owns here, but there was a lot of development in the pipe, so to speak, that we needed to get out ahead of if we wanted to leverage it in a way that improved the corridor's appeal. And we thought that was a good place to start. Another reason to start was that Meeker Street is the historic main street in that town. It's a very visible corridor that is named for the pioneer Ezra Meeker. It has an identification with the city. It passes through the historic core. It was a traditional way in and out of town. But a parallel facility has been built. Willis Street, 516, is the other east-west route. To have two east-west routes this close to each other, Meeker was in our transportation master planning as a 5-lane arterial, where you would have to tear down the bridge and turn it into a 5-lane road. If you look at the expense of doing that, $70 million plus at the time when it was estimated, I'm sure the last 10, 12 years hasn't been kind to that cost estimation. It's probably escalated quite a bit since then. So from a traffic standpoint, knowing that we have a parallel highway at 516, it sort of made sense to consider, well, do we need to then also buy a lot of right-of-way along Meeker Street corridor, the historic Main Street, and also start building a lot of additional road lanes? Is that a financially responsible decision, or is this a good place as the historic Main Street, with all the development that was coming, to sort of lean into a new concept? And that's when we hired very low cost, a group called Smart Growth America. And they do some things by grants, some things are low bono or at cost. And they consult nationally with communities. And the reason for hiring this group was to get back with our own staff, to get back with our transportation engineers, with our planners. It was a multi-day workshop where we brought in these outside experts to say, you have a lot of flexibility and judgment as engineers when you're looking at it. The pattern books that you look at are not necessarily the only way things can be. You actually have a lot of broad flexibility as professionals. And a concept that has it's no longer just in vogue. It's not just a fad. It's now just widely adopted in thousands of communities countrywide over the last 20, 30 years. There's a concept called complete streets. And that means a complete street is one that isn't just focused on one mode of transportation. It looks at multi-modes. It looks at lots of different ways to use that street. It looks at not just travel lanes for cars, but on your left is an example, Gary, Illinois, not a complete street. Something was lacking here. And after complete streets, behold, there's a place for people to walk as well as drive a car. That's in its most simplistic terms. But there's more complicated examples. For instance, Lancaster, California here, this is the before image, here is the during construction, and here's after. And what you can notice is the improvements that were made that make it easier to cut across on foot, to walk, to park your car, things that make it more attractive and more vibrant streetscape. It's more than just, put a bird on it, hang a flower plot. It's about really thinking about it as additional transportation needs in and out of the area. It's about getting more value out of your right-of-way. So we hired this group, as I said, and they walked our Meeker Street corridor. And although they emphasize that complete streets is a policy you want to put citywide, and we have since adopted complete street policies citywide, it's not just about a special street. Meeker's kind of special. So we walked it, and we came up with a vision that was saying, you know what, we think this is feasible. This is something we can do. There are different segments and characters as you go across Meeker Street from the railroad station to the riverfront, but the bones are there. So the consultant is actually pretty interesting because he turned out later to be the head of Washington's Department of Transportation. It was Roger Millard. He was the president of Smart Growth. He kind of helped came up with our plan. He later became deputy director about a few weeks after he did the Kent project, and then later he got to be hired as state of DOT head. So that was nice. That felt like an endorsement from the state. So the city staff, we went out and we knocked on doors of businesses. We started going to residents' meetings. We started collecting what did we hear? We'd like more parking on the street, right? We'd like it to be, people are going too fast. They treat it like a highway, and this isn't a highway. For instance, the elementary school is on Meeker Street, you might have noticed, and about 2/3 of the kids that go to that school actually walk to school every day. It's actually one of the densely populated corridors of the city, and it was kind of incompatible with the idea of how we built the road and how all our plans were for that. It would, as soon as the money was made available to build a $70 million five-lane bridge, everything would then turn into a highway, and we would knock off all the strip malls and turn into a highway. Well, that wasn't going to happen. So how do we then embrace the fact that things have to be safer? How do we listen to the things that people are saying? Things like, at night it's dark out and I walk to my car after I close up my business and I don't feel safe. Here's some of the words. We asked people in one word. We went to residences. There's a lot of apartments around there. So one word, describe Meeker. Busy, loud. Convenient. It's convenient. There's a lot of things to go buy and purchase. We heard from one woman whose son every day would walk to work at Safeway, and nearly, she was afraid for his life because he would always get nearly clipped at the intersections. Or seniors who would like to go get out of their senior housing complex, walk across the street and go talk to the kids at the elementary school, but they feel afraid to cross the street. There's nowhere to cross the street. So we started collecting all these ideas, and then here's an example of us. We tried to go out to the community. We tried to go to the things that they already had scheduled rather than hold public calls where they would have to come to us. We went to barbecues and things that they were doing. And we distilled from that a concept, a vision. We brought an outside consultant as well. And we worked with them and took the input that we heard. And we landed on an idea, sort of a big idea that could be flexed at different parts of the Meeker Street corridor. And the big idea was the Meeker Street Promenade that had an amenity zone, that had a protected facility that could be used by bicycle as well as people who walk, and then introduce on-street parking. And we could do this minimally in terms of right-of-way. We don't have to acquire a lot of new right-of-way to do that. There's just so much there if you just simply have a different understanding of how big lanes have to be if you're not programming the lanes for 50 miles per hour, but for 35 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour, you gain space back. You're being more frugal with the space that you have, and you're deploying it in ways that generate more value. So the Meeker Street Promenade was the concept that we then wanted to test, eventually more with the public. But we did some additional online survey, and we found some interesting things out. Like, when there's a parallel route like 516, and you need to go west, why do you take Meeker? Is it because it's the first turn you arrive at? Or why do that? Because you can go much faster with less lights if you go to 516 first. And we even removed the HOV lane, you might have noticed, on Washington Avenue to encourage that. But why do that? A large number of people said things like connection to business. That they actually chose Meeker because they were trying to make a destination stop on the way there. Another reason to have on-street parking, another reason to think about, is this a place to go through fast, or is it a place that we actually want people to slow down, see businesses, visit them? Around the same time, or a little earlier, to be honest, we were also thinking about how do we extend our design guidelines for what development happens adjacent to the street, that we coach it to be in a way, guided in a way that looks more like expansion of downtown, that we're bringing closer to, we orient buildings closer to the street, we shrink the scale, instead of the buildings being developed in a way that speaks to cars with big parking fields in front and giant signs, that it have more of a dense attitude. We put those design guidelines in place. Well, we sold the par 3 golf course, but in that discussion, we really wanted to make sure that there was public benefit in terms of the open space, the public spaces that were designed. We didn't want just an apartment complex that was inward focusing on this former public land. We wanted to make sure that it started to connect the Green River Loop Trail on the western edge along the river to the interurban trail in the east. But this was an opportunity to launch some of the concepts and ideas that we've been talking about. And so negotiating with them, it was really important, A, that we have retail, that there be some public spaces, B, that there's connections through the project to the river, C, that we actually had an opportunity to prime the pump, if you will, for the grand concept, the promenade, and that this could work as a standalone, but it also helped launch at the western end this new street and design construction standard. That we start to catch up to the other cities that have worked with urban design firms to create streets and standards that have a more urban nature. That we started looking to places like Burien and their downtown, or Redmond, and we start to launch it. So, as I mentioned, a lot of what Meet Me at Meeker was developing these new standards. And you might ask, well, what are standards? What are the street standards? So, eventually, we created streetscape types along Meeker that played with the concept, so that we kind of adapt and adjust the conditions. As you get closer to Washington Avenue, the number of lanes needs to widen a little bit to accommodate the larger thoroughfare of Washington Avenue. In other places, it can flex. Do we need as much amenity zone? Or in an area where we have lots of public right-of-way, the amenity zone can be larger. And those are the types of trade-offs where the on-street parking makes sense. And then we've created a booklet and we've passed new design standards so that when new development or redevelopment occurs along Meeker Street, they look at this pattern book, they go, oh, this is where I'm at. And our development engineers have something to reference and saying, you need to build to this new standard when you build your frontage improvements. So that it's investment from private sources that are helping to build and construct our Meeker Street corridor. And these are some examples from the pattern book that was developed. On your left, you can see there's the detail of what should the pavers look like so that there's a uniform feel across west to east as you're connecting the waterfront to the downtown. There starts to be this kind of language that the road will speak, that people will understand and see, and start to create some additional identity and visibility for the city of Kent. And this is what it looks like in terms of an engineering drawing. It gets into details of what the benches need to look like, or what does the garbage receptacle need to look like. And this is what the lighting needs to look like. And here's the patterns and colors that are acceptable for pavers, so that they start to have some sort of harmony all along the corridor. So this eventually won this year an award from the Department of Commerce as a Smartarse Award. It was considered it was recognizing the successful achievement of a city with implementing its county-wide planning policies, comprehensive plan or sub-area plan. So for creating a flexible, usable, implementable design and construction standard that the development community is actually employing in the world, we were recognized by the governor. Catch up here. So, talk a little bit about Meeker and 64th, because this is sort of an interesting proof of concept. This is the 10 acres that used to be the Cancer Care Site of America. Someone might know it as that. More than 11, 12 years ago now. Cancer Care of America wanted to build a hospital here. They were vetoed at a state level by other hospitals who didn't want the competition. No need to belabor that story, but important thing to note is that 10 acres, they kind of forgot they owned it, which sounds impossible, but I made the call. The folks in Minnesota are like, why do you still own this property? Why is it a vacant field after a decade? And they said, oh, we own that? And then they said, yeah, it's a hot real estate market. Why sit on it? So it went for sale. But what they didn't notice was that actually to the north, you might notice there used to be a Shell gas station that's still in rough shape today, but I'm more hopeful for now than ever before because of all the investment that's coming. That had some underground leaking gas that went under the street onto this property. That means it's a brownfield. There was also an orchard at one point in time. Pesticides, also brownfield. Brownfield is just not an indication of how contaminated a property really is or how dangerous it really is. It just creates enough uncertainty into a potential purchaser's mind that they don't want to buy it. So to unstick it, we actually had some federal grant funding from the EPA to do phase 1, phase 2 environmental site assessments. We went to the property owner and said, we'll give you a portion of this money if you also put in some private dollars and we'll help unstick this property. We will characterize the extent of this contamination, which isn't really that scary, but we can just put it in its right place and then that'll get out of the way of the deal because you can start to understand what the price ought to be. Oh, so go stay on this for a little bit longer. So Goodman Real Estate, who's first project in this area, and he's one of the largest owners of apartments in the region, did the Signature Point Apartments. There's about 1,600 units there. It's where we were pictured at the barbecue. A lot of residents there. Anyways, he's looking at the marquee on Meeker, which is the golf course development. He's seen, wow, 492 units, $2.24 a square foot for rent. That's a lot higher than the rest of Kent. 10 acres right next to me, and this new frontage improvement standard that you're going to have everyone else build to adds a lot of value back to me into my other projects and my other units. I want that property. So he purchased the 10 acres. And he is now really bought in, and is also not only building their frontage standard, which is slightly more expensive than the existing of building to their arterial. However, he's doing that and also contributing traffic impact fees, close to $900,000. So that was a pretty positive thing. This is another 365 units. And what you're looking at here on the frontage, they pull the building up. It's not those types of suburban style, garden style apartments where all the apartments are way back, recessed, screened from the street. They're leaning into Meeker. They're bringing in more investment, more eyes on the street. They're having podium product, so more expensive construction, more concrete, more rebar, more expensive product because they see the rents now. And they actually designed 29 flex units. So that's, like you might have seen in Seattle, where the business owner can rent upstairs, but then also occupy new business space down below. Lots of new opportunities for small businesses to open up onto Meeker Street. Again, buying into this new construction design standard. So this is another 365 units on top of the 492 units that Goodman. They're both under construction now. If you drive down Meeker, it's kind of exciting to see all the dirt getting moved. And we also didn't want to leave the elementary school out of that, because the next big site to the east of that is the 10 acres of the Kent Elementary School. And we did a lot of public outreach there. We got translators, because that's one of the, as you might have heard before, Kent School District has over 130 languages spoken in it. And actually the #1 spoken language here is Marshallese. This is a very, so it was very important to us to reach out to the families there. And my colleague, pictured in some of these, Haley Von Steele, went out on weekends with a consultant, with some translators, and started saying, what would you like? Because right now, if you go there today, there's this chain link fence. The kids look it looks pretty institutional. It's got the weeds growing up in it, and the vines, and they've had a lot of issues of people kind of wandering over and saying inappropriate things to the kids across the fence. It doesn't look very welcoming. It's just kind of this trying to stay back from the big highway, the big mean highway. Well, if there's a different approach to how the city lays out the street, how would the school, how would the families and the kids like to see the neighboring field develop? So you're getting this before the city council or the school district, or so. I'm going to unwind what we've developed here, but there's a vision now of one way in which the frontage of the school could also look better, just like the neighboring developments look better. And what you have here is a sort of a laser cut fence with colorful art and imagery and a new entrance that would perhaps point to that kids, instead of having to walk this long roundabout way that they have to now to the school, can enter right off of Meeker through this new plaza. And there's some other additional nice renderings here where they have all the different languages saying welcome as you walk across a new sidewalk into the building. So there's a new way for the school potentially to engage with the street. And I just want to mention, we work with Kent Town Health Partnership to put lighting. They raised money, worked with us to get lighting under the underpass. And part of this, in a similar vein, we were thinking all this development is happening on Meeker Street. Want to make sure this cave-like underpass isn't the part that falls down as you go from west to east. We wanted it to be lit attractively. A lot of things can happen with that. Start with a vision. So it may start with this, but I think if we keep at it, it could, working with the community, the wider community, we could realize that better fence. We could realize that better entrance. And with that, I just want to say that there's a lot of other dominoes still to fall. So we have the 24 acres here under construction, 10 acres here, 34 acres, nearly $200 million in development there. Elementary school's coming. You might have heard Kmart is closing. There's another 13 acres. And then there's the 7 acres the city owns. It's over 50 acres in a short span that's under development. I just want to read off some of the things that help encapsulate the last 3 years of effort here. There were over 10 public meetings which held each reaching at least 150 people. There were 245 online surveys collected. As I mentioned, there's 34 acres currently in development with the potential for another 22 acres. We had 3 brownfield assessments at $35,000 of value, $12,000 of which were leveraged from private sources. We have 857 units. So to put that another way, that's each one of those are the new household, the median household income levels that we see today at Kent. It should probably be higher than the median household income in Kent today because they are market rate, because they are going to command rents higher than Kent as a whole, but that's at least $62 million in new spending that is now available on this corridor. So if only 4% of that was realized by local businesses, that's another $2.5 million of spending for local businesses. Let's see, the 15 new studios, 141 one-bedrooms, 132 two-bedrooms, 84 three-bedrooms at Marquis and Meeker, 11,000 new square feet of retail, 4 new storefronts. Goodman's going to have another 89,000 square feet on 10 acres, 365 units, 29 flex, 18 studio, 180 one-bedroom, 138 two-bedroom, 2,500 linear feet of enhanced bikeway and community promenade, over $200 million of private investment realized, nearly $1.2 million in traffic impact fees contributed so far, over $376,000 in stormwater fees collected for Marquis and Meeker, another $252,000 for Meeker at 64th. So I think it's off to a good start, and I think as it continues, as we see more and more intensive development along the Meeker Street corridor, I think there'll be a lot of other business and investment opportunities close in. So again, $70 million project for a new arterial road over this corner, several $100 million in new investment and new spending on an annual basis in that corner. I think kind of endorses the complete street approach to being thrifty and achieving more by having a different vision for what could happen. Thanks.
All right, so Bill, we'll take a couple of questions to the Meeker Street on Meeker and economic development that he's spoken about. So if you have questions on that, here is Bill again.
So they have done a redevelopment of the east side of Meeker, which includes part of where the chamber is located.
Oh, yeah.
Is there going to be a consistency of what that looks like all the way down Meeker, and then where Smith then intersects with that? How's that gonna all work out?
Sure. I'll just gesture here to the screen. Most of what we were, so you saw in the Promenade concept was going to be on the south side, partly because that's the sunnier side of the street, but also because that's where a lot of the development was happening. You might be pointing to is over here. You might have seen all the buildings come down here. That's an EB5 investment group that has plans that are permitted for 165 units. They have not seemed to proceed. I think they're having some finance raising issues. It's an exotic type of financing, EB5. They purchased a lot of the single-family homes here. They're already planning for a second project, although they haven't built the first one yet, I will say. But the idea is for a vision for the design construction standards that all of it, all the way until it halts just before the historic district. Because then the right-of-ways, first of all, it's more walkable at that point. It's more bikeable. We've already reached the interurban trail, so you've connected the two trail systems. So from that point east, again, it's going to flex. It's going to be a little less different. You may have already noticed that we introduced on-street parking to that portion of Meeker. And that was part of the concept. So we've already sort of narrowed the road. We took away a lane, we added on-street parking, which I think went unnoticed from a traffic standpoint, but has already been embraced from a parking standpoint. And from there east, we're not going to purchase old buildings and demolish them to create a bike promenade. They're just, it's about bringing the energy to the doorstep of there. Something that we're still talking about with King County Parks is additional grant funding, because I think this type of vision really does speak well for grants. Is the last mile between the transit station for bicyclists and the trail systems. There's a dedicated grant funding source for that, and that's a conversation that's ongoing because it's a little tricky as you get from here to there, balancing losing on-street parking stalls versus bicycle facility. And so that's an ongoing discussion.
All right, so a big thank you to Bill Ellis and Michelle Wilmot for being here, and Economic Development for talking about this project. It's very exciting. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Golden Steer for hosting and KSC Freight for sponsoring the event.